are listening to the Balancing Act podcast. Here's your hosts, Jamie Wonko and Joe Vitale.
Well, hey, she's ready. And she's
Are you ready?
I mean, who isn't? Well, we are officially recording. Hey, buddy, how are you?
Hey, how are you, Mr. Vitale? It's me, Jamie Wonko.
Hey,
From
there
a
she
hot,
is.
hot day. I know, a hot, hot day wearing a material that I can't want to wear it. I can't want to wear it.
So we had sports jersey day today at school, and somebody was not a very big fan of I don't like the way this feels on my body. And I get it. I get it.
Hate
There's
it.
like that
Maybe
whole
that's why I'm not an athlete.
Yes, that's why.
It
You
must be.
figured it must be. Us all the sports ball all the time. My favorite part of that story from today was how your son was trying to explain who the jersey was and what the player was, and you were like, "Yeah, I don't want to know. I just want to leave." And then
Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, thank you.
Well, look, I'm very excited. We have a guest in the wings. I'm very excited to bring him on for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into. But I want to definitely welcome Merve Lapus. Hello, sir. It is awesome to have you here with us here on the Balancing Act podcast on human content. So thanks a lot for joining us, man.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. I was just waiting for the invite. I'm like, yo, I've known Joe for some time now. And
Yes.
Jamie, she's got an energy. I'm like, why am I not on this podcast? So
Listen, you and I go back before this. I remember being, and I asked you today, we were talking about it. You gave a presentation at an SHI conference like a bazillion years ago and I remember sitting there.
Excuse me. What is SHI?
SHI, it was like a company. It's like some kind of tech company. What is SHI?
yeah, software company that brought a lot of kind of different tools into the education space.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm down with OPP, but I didn't know SHI.
So
it's the under. Like if you're down with OPP, you need to really get deep to find out
this
more
is the
about
underground.
SHI.
So I remember being there and you presented at the conference and you put up a graphic that and again I was talking about it earlier today and it wasn't in that presentation you had sent to me. Anyway, it was a graphic that was like and you said we've produced more data in the last 2 years or 10 years or whatever the facts and figures were than we had in all other human history combined. And my brain just went, wait, what? And I kind of perked up and I was paying attention during the conference. Don't get me wrong, but that was a really eye-opening statement to me. And I immediately snapped a picture of it, which of course I can't find. And I remember going over that with students and other staff members and showing them that and just how dynamic that was. So we met a bunch of different times and started talking and did some stuff during the pandemic. And
can you imagine? I said that I don't know how long ago.
Yeah.
Where are we now? Right?
Yeah.
So we're at a point where AI is the worst that it'll ever be in its lifetime. We are at a point where we've created probably 1,000x of these data points than that one moment in presenting. So
absolutely
it's a different time.
So and when Jamie and I were thinking of starting a podcast, you and I met in Philly, and I said hey man, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? And you're a yes and guy, man. That's what I love about you so much. If I run an idea by you, it's yes and then we can and then you should. And I was just okay, I kind of got the wheels turning. And I said and definitely want to have you on as a guest at some point. And here we are. So I'm really excited.
Full circle.
Yeah, full circle. To get my West Coast buddy, but via New Jersey. Let's not forget.
It's where it all started. And quite honestly, it's I've got family in New Jersey. I really should be seeing you more often if I am out there seeing my family.
Yeah, I know. We gotta. Yes. So,
so let's go back in the time machine.
Yeah.
And tell us, Merv, tell us a little bit about your background, yourself, some of your experience, before you and Joe met, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I've been in ed tech for probably over 26, 27 years now. I actually started off so I was teaching 7th grade for a little bit. And then after that, I moved into the after school space where I was working with a program called Success Maker, which was then kind of underneath an organization called SCORE, which was under Kaplan. And so I was in this after school program. My whole focus was using this tool to try and uncover where the skill gaps were for English and math for kids from kindergarten to high school level. And so that was my first kind of like jaunt into like, all right, understanding the tech and its creation and how do we apply it to really understand the needs of kids. And then after that time frame, ended up going in a couple different directions from going all the way up to higher education and working at university levels. I had this big like feelings like, oh, I want to work at a university. I had such a great time in my undergrad, kind of being in leadership. I was like, I want to really kind of impact that and do that kind of work. And had my opportunities in doing that, and then quickly realized the kids that I was serving, or the young adults at the time I was serving, were clearly not ready for university for a number of reasons.
Hmm.
Academics were a big part, but then just so much more in addition to that. So I went back into the K-12 space and then started working with another company that was building at that time a an exam that we needed in California for kids to pass in order for them to actually get their diploma. So you can graduate but not walk, essentially, in California if you didn't pass what they call that KC, the California High School Exit Exam. And in that work, we had to go up against a series of really established companies to then kind of become this adopted resource and tool that we then created, which again was an ed tech product to identify the skill gaps and needs of kids so that we can get kids to actually graduate and build up those skill gaps. And in that work, working with districts, and so one, it's like working with districts. Two was then about implementation, and then three was about professional development and really building educators up to one, understand the value, be able to implement, and then really celebrate those wins and opportunities. And in that work, found this organization called Common Sense that asked essentially of me to do the same kind of work I was doing in the ed tech space, but with a bottom line of service and impact, not necessarily how many dollars I brought in to this really great tool that I really believed in. So that's how it all kind of started. That's what kind of got me into the business, essentially. That, and I've loved tech forever. Every time there's an announcement, it's in my calendar. I'm like, oh, big Google announcement, big Apple announcement, big whatever. I'm one of those guys where literally it's like I've got one of my 3 screens on and I want to get all in. And then I had a family, and then I was like, okay, what are the impacts of all this stuff on my family? So I've essentially raised my kids in Common Sense through this work, and have the opportunity of just working with educators from around the country. We're currently now 90,000 registered schools using our resources, additional 6,000 internationally, about 1.4 million educators that access our resources annually.
Wow. And there's been a lot of it. There's been a shift, right? At least I can feel it, where there are a lot of districts and individual schools, individual teachers in their classroom that are getting away from ed tech a little bit because of the amount of screen time. We've talked a little bit about gamification here, where like everything is gamified, and maybe that's a little bit of an overkill. And I kind of would like to pick your brain and get some thoughts on where you see Common Sense's role, or like that role, because you mentioned just before, like you've brought your kids up in this, right? And
Yeah.
Matt, can I ask again how old your kids are for our listeners, if you don't mind?
12 and 14.
12 and 14. And I'm I have 2 16-year-olds, Jamie. We're all in the same boat, in the same canoe, rowing in the same direction. So, and we're experiencing that on a regular basis with our kids about what they're doing or what they should be doing. But I'm kind of wondering what your kids are experiencing in their classes, and what, you think things might look like in the next couple of years as we decide to maybe, for a variety of different reasons, scale back some of the ed tech that's in the classrooms.
Sure. So I think this brings up a number of things. One of them, I think let's just kind of recognize the timeline that got us here, right? We had kind of tech coming up in the classroom. I operated with cows, like computers on wheels. And then I essentially grew up with like,
I never heard it referred to as that.
You never heard of cows? Yeah. Well, you got all the computers just on that one cart, and you're sharing it across your entire middle school.
Okay. I like that.
I came up with the 2 computers in the back of the class. Like everyone just signs up. You got to do good, and you get like your 20 minutes of time on Oregon Trail to try and just get past, hunting, right?
Oh, I died of dysentery so many times.
Yes, every time I feel like.
Yeah.
So we went from that, and then we recognized that there was this big divide that existed in not just our communities, but then even in our schools. And there was a race to connect all of our schools. And then in that race, then found all these great new tools that came out, especially like iPads and Chromebooks. And then there was this big app gap, essentially, where only schools that had access to funding or resources could really then bring these apps and tools into the classroom. And then there became this thing that I called a lit rift, a literacy rift. Now we've got all these tools, and how do we really understand how the tools work, the impact of the tools, and how are they then impacting our kids? And then on top of that, you've got this big umbrella of social media and reality television, and then just big differences in the way that kids are consuming and receiving media and content, and then that then follows them into their schools. So then we have lockdown, right? And in that time leading up to lockdown and COVID, there was already a push around like cell phones kind of being the equalizer. Just we cannot afford one-to-one devices, so we're bringing in cell phones because kids have that personal device and that can give them access to content. And then we had the shutdowns, and then that brought in a lot of money, and that became one-to-one, and everyone went one-to-one. And now we are finding, or we're at least recognizing, that in many classrooms there is a recognition that, oh, maybe we went all in too much too fast. Maybe there are really great opportunities that technology is not needed for. And how do we just really recognize, when do we need it? How do we use it? And when do we not need it? And how do we put it away? Right. And I think that's just on the instructional side. Right. And then there's the bigger conversation around all of our kids, well, not all of our kids, but a large majority of kids, especially if you're looking at fifth grade and above, now have their own personal devices. And how does that now then impact the classroom? And those are big conversations that are happening on top of just really thinking about our current state with technology. And let's be honest, we've got to think about it on an instructional need. We've also got to think about it on a fiscal availability. After all this funding came in, we invested into all of these learning management systems, different technology, as well as one-to-one devices. But these devices will age out at some point. And how do we sustain the use of those devices? Don't necessarily know that there's funding built in for every school district to be able to maintain that. So there's that reality of projecting in the future, coupled with the reality of we are looking at what are ways that we kind of pull back on just direct instruction through tech and leveraging it really when it's beneficial and when we want it available and present.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
No, yeah, we recently had about a month time period where we went techless, and it was a really interesting exercise, and I think it gave us all an just this experience of looking at why we use it, how much. Is it enough? What's worth it? What did we miss? But at the same time, I was one of the first people to go one-to-one in 2016, like the 2016-2017 school year. And so then going into the pandemic, I felt really prepared, where I think that I was very, very lucky for that, where I watched other people go into it without that same level of preparation, and so I think that has also hurt a lot of the like the misuse, because they just weren't really. It was just like, I have to do this, and it was you don't have to, but at the same time, how do you figure out when is enough, or is it too much, and then of course I do kind of lean to the side of, don't take it away, because there are certain things that I know are much more interesting, engaging, and work for me and my students in my classroom. So, it's all about, what's going to work and what's not going to work. There are a lot of people now. You live in California. There's a lot of people I've heard that will say like, "Oh, California, they don't even use computers." Oh, they're getting rid of them. They're getting rid of them. Those tech people over there on the West Coast. What do you tell us? Is that true?
we hear about it a lot of, especially in independent schools. I can't say that that's happening in as many, I would say, kind of like middle of the road school districts. Maybe in more, high access districts, they might find that they're bringing in kind of really instructional designers and professional PD that allows for those educators to kind of get that deeper training of like becoming a little bit more malleable again with their teacher practice from just previous years of what almost felt like we just need to figure it out. Let's do the best, and then that just kind of becomes your blueprint for how to do the next year, right? But in order to kind of disrupt that or kind of reshape that, you need attention, you need time, you need training. And you need to be able to really make sure that it's adapted to kind of your outcomes of expectation as an educator. We can't just like put out this big, broad, ideas and expect them all to kind of make the changes themselves. It's a lot to ask. So I would say it's not necessarily happening across the Bay or across the California, but there are definitely kind of those pockets of conversations, and there's definitely broad discussions, not just in California, in many other states where they are thinking, how much tech do we actually need? What's its purpose? What's its intent? Now that we're at a space where we can have kids in a classroom using tech, how are we really leveraging it for its intention?
So one of the things that came about from that presentation that I sat in of yours was, and I still have this picture, because it was also eye opening to me because here I am sitting in a presentation with two 10-year-olds at home, and they're in elementary school, and you posted a quote from Linda Darling Hammond from Stanford University. Schools must prepare students for jobs that do not yet exist, creating ideas and solutions for products and problems that have not yet been identified, using technologies that have not yet been invented. So there we are
Mhm.
sitting there. That's a very deep comment. But now, are we at yet another tipping point when we talk about AI and AI tools and how they're going to be used in a classroom? Because there we are, literally like using tools that haven't been invented yet for jobs that are not yet in existence.
Yeah,
That it's so dynamic to me on a macro level to think about, what that's going to look like for not just my kids, my own children, but like the kids that I teach right now. What's it going to look like for them when they get into college? And you're right, this is the
yeah,
same age, right? Like I teach seventh grade,
totally.
we're in middle school. So that's where your kids are. Like, what is that
Yeah.
going to look like? And nobody knows the answer to that.
I mean, I think the reality is this, however, in general, our jobs are to prepare kids to be able to address, or at least hopefully have a foundation. And I say this as a parent as well as an educator. I'm going to lean toward the parent side first. I want to prepare my kids so that regardless of when or where they run into a situation, I've given them enough fundamentals to be able to think critically about it and make the decision that's going to be morally imperative, that's going to really align with their ideals, and that they know right from wrong,
Hmm.
right? And regardless, that's online and that's offline. And, academically, we need to provide a foundation of critical thinking for our kids so that they can really really test against, what do I want to get from this? How do I align with this? How do I find counter arguments? A foundation of learning, a foundation of value and inquiry, right? That they can then apply anywhere they go and anytime they need it. I think we build up a lot of these skills, or we hope that we build these skills in the classroom space. We also want to make sure that they are transferable. We want our kids to be able to take this and do this offline when they're alone, studying alone, or interacting and engaging with media and technology alone. Doesn't mean they have to be immersed full tech in the classroom in order to be able to do that at home. It
Hmm.
means that we need to be able to build them into that understanding and draw those connections for them through practice, through role modeling, and through reinforcing those types of conversations in a very open and honest way, one that actually ties and connects them to the discussion, not one that's just trying to almost kind of catch them in the act or get them to see your way. That just teaches them to pass the quiz or
Yeah.
complete the exit ticket and move on, right?
Yeah. Where do you stand personally on social media with your own kids?
Yeah, so my kids don't have social media. The closest thing they have to it is Pinterest. But
Mm.
even with that, we have a number of conversations because, depending on what your interests are, my kids are really interested in anime. Anime has
Yep.
a large
Yeah.
continuum
Yeah.
of what can be shown.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of these open conversations, and in addition to that, I've been having these conversations with them since they were young, and I tell them all the time, you will never get in trouble coming to me for something that was uncomfortable or something that you thought you were doing the right decision, but it didn't turn out right. You'll never get in trouble for coming to me to ask questions, to find guidance, or explore it at any cost. You will get in trouble if you are purposely hiding something because that means you did something wrong and you're trying to get away with it. That's where we run into issues, right? But you'll never get in trouble if you run into something or you just have a question. And they come to me for a lot of things, and some of them are conversations that I just didn't know I needed to have at this age. But middle school kids talk and they share
Yeah.
things, and it's a whole diverse community that they attend school with, and so they bring that home sometimes. And so it's up to me to be able to provide that safe space, so they're not only coming to me when there's a problem, and they're not only, or they're not coming to me because they know that if they bring in a problem, I'm going to act a certain way. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with parents, especially around tech. Um, overly overreaction to the situations, or oftentimes we only talk about the situations when there is a problem, not
Hmm.
necessarily in our day to day.
Mhm.
Oh, one of the things I practice all the time, they tell me about something interesting. Oh, have you looked it up further? Like, what more do you know about it? Um, how did you find a counter argument to that? Oh no, I never really thought. Okay, let's do it now. Tell me what you get, and just kind of get them into that practice of thinking critically, right, at all times, and that is a healthy position to take on. I
Have
think
they?
that's one of my. Oh, go ahead.
No, has your 14-year-old asked? I mean, I'm like, hey, can I get Snapchat or can I get Instagram?
That's all the time, and I was like, "Tell me what you want to get out of it." And what it always comes down to is like, "Oh, well, all my friends have it." I'm like,
Mhm.
"I hear that. I get it. What are they doing on there that you feel like you need to do yourself?" And when I ask that question, there's the response typically has to do with it's where they talk the most with each other. And I say I get it. And so in that way, because they talk on a different platform, because you talk via text message with them, do you feel like you're not able to have a conversation with them, or do you feel like you're missing certain things? Oh, I can talk to them as much as I want, but maybe I'm just kind of missing a more direct connection to a meme they're talking about, or
Mm.
something that's going viral there. I was like, well, find out what those things are and we'll find them together. Like, even if it feels super cringy and corny, I'd much rather know about it, because I want to make sure you're not walking into something that can potentially be turned against you.
Yeah, because
And
I try to stay on top of stuff too with my middle schoolers, and then all of a sudden now we're into Italian brain rot, and
yeah,
a plane with the head of an alligator. What like why? What is it? And
I
how is it?
know.
Somebody tell me how it's entertaining. That's what I want to
Yeah,
know. Okay,
it's not to me.
because like Jamie and I were watching, Pee Wee's Playhouse on a Saturday morning, and then we were walking around acting like Pee Wee Herman, like most kids did in
Yeah,
our age group.
totally.
Yeah. But it's so interesting to me, like to try and keep up on the trends. And I'll even say to my students sometimes, they'll say something like, "All right, I'm gonna Google this on
Yeah.
my work computer. Am I gonna get fired?" And they're like, "No, you're fine." So anyway, yeah,
I
it's
saw I don't know if this is true or not, but I saw a woman, speaking about, because I've been fighting the anti-social media fight here, and they don't I have twins, they're 12, and they don't ask, really very often. Every once in a while, they'll kinda like, "Oh, how old do we have to be?" And I saw and every once in a while, I'm like, well, 13, but every year that I get closer to the age I thought it was gonna be, I keep bumping it to I
Yeah.
don't know when, but there was a woman, and she was speaking about, she was a pediatrician, and she was saying, I'd rather have my child smoke than use
Mm.
social media,
oh damn.
because at
Okay.
least if you quit after so many years of smoking, your lungs will regenerate, but you're gonna alter your brain chemistry for the rest of your life in a way that you'll never be able to change. And I was like, well,
That's
okay, the
crazy.
age just became never, you know.
Yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
know.
it sounds provocative, but there's a lot of like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
a lot of where these kids are thinking about these things, understanding long-term ethical consequences,
Mm.
understanding impact of these quick decisions that they're making. That all happens at prefrontal cortex, and that's the last thing to develop.
Right.
And so if you're processing through these like really complex decisions without having real guidance that you've even formed yourself, then yeah, it can have an impact in the way that you're making connections in your future, the way that you think about relationships, the way that you think about impact, right? And
Yeah.
impact in our community used to just be centralized around our direct community.
Exactly.
And now we're looking at, impact that can go global.
Right.
And that's, more likely for, you know, unfortunate things versus positive things.
And that's the I think a lot of kids have the idea of I'm invincible. That's not going to happen to me. You know, like I talk to my son all the time who's about to be driving age. I'm like, he was looking at a car and he's looking at, as which he looks at a Mustang, buddy, never
Yeah.
going to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's too much speed. It's too much power for you to be in a vehicle as a first car. And he's like, yeah, but
Yeah.
blah, blah. I'm like, no, because you think you're invincible. And sometimes these kids online, they feel like, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to be the one that gets in trouble because I post a funny joke or I send the meme to someone or I, send the picture that somebody else sent to me to somebody else and then everybody gets in trouble. Like they never think it's going to be them, but then it is.
Yeah.
So I know one of the reasons that we wanted to definitely talk with you today, Merv, is that you recently attended a panel about, cell phones in school.
Mhm.
And there's been some huge conversations around that, down to legislators and the governor of New Jersey saying, I want to have an unequivocal ban of cell phones during the school day in New Jersey schools. Which I kind of feel is like it's putting the toothpaste back in the tube. I don't know if it's something we could actually do at this point, unless you're starting it with younger grades. That's just my personal opinion. And I'm just curious as to what other school leaders in the panel that you were on had to say about that subject and basically where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is like over 40 states already have some kind of policy in place or moving down the legislative pipeline when it comes to cell phone policies. Even in California, we've got a policy that mandates all schools, all districts to have a phone policy in place. It doesn't say a phone ban though. So I think that's what's the interesting part is there are states, there's at least 4 states that I know of right now that have a purely like bell to bell ban, no phones allowed in the schools, right? And so that's that. And then you've got other states, most other states where they have a policy that's focused on developing some kind of cell phone policy. And for
Mhm.
some districts or some schools, it's going to be a straight bell to bell ban, and it's easier when you're looking at younger grades, right? But then when we think about like middle, but especially even into high school, it's going to be incredibly challenging to be able to really kind of see that through 100% just because of just one, the setup of the day. Um, but then two, just how much additional expectation we put onto our educators kind of ensure that this is going to work and it's going to happen. And then all the solutions that they come up to try and solve this, they've got pouches, they've got policies around keep them in lockers or a phone collection that happens in the beginning of the day, out of sight and silent, right? So just trusting that you're not going to see it or some other kind of in class collection. And each one of those solutions has their own benefits, along with so many other challenges that then have to be kind of figured out. But the conversation for me, I mean, I agree there's a reality that we are wanting to ensure that we are providing the most engaging and focused kind of opportunities for instruction in the classroom. And that there is real data that shows that, based on notifications, like we did this study a year and a half or so ago, where we actually followed kids around their families, allowed for us to track everything that was going on their phone for a week to see how many notifications they were getting. Right. And on any given day, we saw that kids were picking up their phones at least 51 times a day. On average, the highest of 498. So 500 times a day, we saw kind of the highest use cases of kids. So
Wow.
from 51 on average to just about 500. And then how much time were they actually spending? Like during school, we saw that there were kids that were spending 43 minutes to an hour during the school day. So that meant they were either allowed to or they were doing it during instruction, which are, again, very specific things. But I think even more so is what brought them to it. Typically, they're notifications, right? How many notifications were kids getting every day? And on average, they were getting 237. But at the top end, kids were getting 4,500 notifications. So it can be a distraction in the classroom if these notifications are pinging them,
Yeah.
right? I think even more important, aside from like, okay, let's take away the distraction. I get that. I get the need to want to take away the distraction in the classroom. Um, but what is that impulse that's keeping that kid connected to the device and why? What's the intention behind it? How do they feel about their connection to the platform themselves or the way that they use this particular tool? Because getting to the root of that is going to really get us to where we say these policies are intended for. So a lot of the policies intentions are to be addressing well-being and academic integrity and fostering joyful learning and playful learning. And you could do those things like with or without a ban, but we know that to remove that big distraction, that gets us one step closer, like a pretty big step closer in the classroom, what we're hopefully trying to keep kids focused. But it doesn't necessarily solve the anxiety that a child's feeling when their phone is not there and they know that they're missing something. It does, if anything, it's just delaying it. And once they get it, and then they spend all that time now once they have it, you've got this kind of like commitment and explosion of time that might increase outside of the classroom. If anything, we'll definitely see that it's going to lead to more restless sleep. Kids are just going to sleep less because they know that's going to be taken away in the morning when they get to the classroom. So if we're going to solve this well-being discussion and this mental health discussion and really understanding and thinking critically about the impact of the way we use it and build real agency, then it's got to be more than just the phone bans or the phone policies. This is, again, Joe, the yes and of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've never really heard it put in that perspective. I haven't. And that was kind of an eye-opening statement, especially when you talk about the kid that is like, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the day to end so then they can go out and open up their phone and immediately, get.
And we want to hope that because it's not in the classroom, they're going to be far more engaged into our lecture, right? Or our presentation. Well, that's much more now than, about us as educators. Like, how are we building up the experience in the classroom for what they're learning? And that it's keeping them engaged in a way that they feel connected to it. And I've seen in many schools where the policy is very much keep it out of sight. If we're not using it in the classroom, it shouldn't be out in the classroom. But they've got this really engaging lesson that's very well spelled out, and they know what they're trying to achieve in doing this work. And the cell phones aren't a problem, right? So I say this saying that it's not a blanket solution for everyone. You really need to understand your community. You really need to understand from your parents and your parents' needs, understand your students, your student needs, your educators, and what kind of support they'll need if you're going to run something like this, as well as how they're role models for it. I think one of the biggest pushbacks we get from a lot of kids and families is the fact that they push out these policies, and when they're doing their work, they're teachers on their phone, right? So how are we role modeling that kind of experience in the classroom? There's got to be a consistency, and we've got to be all bought in if we're gonna see really it be as valuable as we hope. But again, it's a yes and. Just removing the device isn't going to solve the bigger issues that we're hoping to solve. It's going to take a lot of real support in those conversations and discovery, and diving into things like digital literacy and citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever seen another adult who has forgotten their phone somewhere at home, the car, wherever it might be, it is an immediate. I've done it myself. It's an immediate panic situation, and logically, I know that if someone in my family needed me or needed something, they know where I am, they know that they could call and they could find me. I've also seen recently an argument because we just got these new in our classroom telephones. So one of the the opposite side arguments was, well, now we all have telephones in our classrooms, and if we needed to dial 911, we can, we have the ability now to dial out, which is new. And I guess one of the parents, in an online back and forth about whether or not there should be a cell phone ban was, if there's a school shooter, my child wants to be able to call me to say goodbye.
Oh,
And
that's hard to combat that, right?
It really, I mean, it's like, what?
But then I also go to the number of kids when we used to allow Bluetooth headphones in the building for students to be able to use them connected to their Chromebooks, and that was banned.
Yeah.
Which I agreed with, because there'd be a number of students that'd be walking down the hallway with headphones on, like the ones that we're currently wearing, or the AirPods in, like yourself, Merv, and I would pull them aside and I say, you at least got to take one out. And they're like, well, I said, listen to me. If we call code red right now, we call lockdown, there's someone in the building that shouldn't be here. Would you hear it? And sometimes the music is blaring so loud, the answer to that would be no. So God forbid, and I know how that makes me sound, but it's so prevalent in things today that it's something I worry about.
Yeah,
worry about.
I've had many discussions with school resource officers and law enforcement who unfortunately have to support schools when there is a problem like this. And the reality is, it's harder for them to save your kid if the ways arteries to get to your children are clogged by parents and community members clogging down the streets to get to the school. It is far more disruptive to to following directions and keeping quiet so you don't create distraction to yourself when you've got kids all on the line crying or screaming or streaming the situation. So we've lost that layer of safety. So I've heard that side of the argument and totally get it as well. I think what families need to recognize or understand, and this is part of those policy conversations, Jamie, that I'm sure happened when regards to making this decision. We need a solution for families to know that there's a way to connect with their kids, because we're taking that away if we're taking away the phones in the classroom. Because that's a lot of the big primary conversations is the safety side. And a phone in your classroom now, like a hard line in your classroom, is here's one of our solutions, right? Trying to make that available. So uh, it's it's a way of trying to meet and mitigate the various stakeholders, um, but it'll only be successful if we can get all stakeholders on board, right?
Yeah, I know there was a Facebook post question by one of our board members, like, should Woodbridge, should our school district, should Woodbridge ban cell phones in the classroom? And we're overwhelmingly, I think that most people in that post were in support of cell phones being banned. I think if you're, as educators, we see like a fight happens, it's immediately recorded, it's put out on social media for everyone to see, and then it winds up making it onto the news. Or, the person that, uh, you know, it records a teacher doing something in the classroom and it winds up being
Yeah,
a disciplinary issue. So, like, there's those things that I'm very sensitive towards, not because and it hasn't happened to me, but I'm just saying, like,
and that was
we
a
need,
trend before. I mean, that was
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
very explicit trend. Like, how do we bait our teachers?
Yeah, how do we,
On social. Yeah.
how do we wind up on YouTube with a million hits to because we, embarrassed our teacher, or had them freak out and they yelled at us. And that to me is something I'm very sensitive towards. And we've talked about the notifications and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
um as far as like, okay, I think that a lot of these policies that come about, at least from educators that I've talked to in various districts, like, they put these policies in place, but they're not enforcing the policies,
Mhm.
you know?
It's not
So,
consistent. There are some teachers that are like, "Ah, we're cool," and then there are others that are like, "This is
yeah.
so hard because they're not listening." And well, there's no
Yeah,
continuity
I
in
know at one point
reinforcement.
when I was at one middle school that I was teaching at earlier in my career, when, cell phones and smartphones became uh, a bigger deal, that the principal at the time was like, "You guys could use your phones during lunch if you want to use them." And everybody's like, "Okay, here we go." And uh, and it was, but you just can't text or call anyone that's not in the building. And I'm like, it's not policeable. Like,
Yeah, how do
you
you
can't
police
monitor
that?
that. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that gets said sometimes to my own children that are at the high school, which they are on their phones constantly. And what are they doing? They're listening to music. My son has
Yeah.
a playlist of every eclectic musical genre that you could possibly put out there. My wife's friends call him Midwest Joe because he's not East Coast or West Coast in regards to his rap preferences. So they
Yeah.
say he's like not what they say, Midwest, yeah, Midwest Joe. They call him like right in the middle because he's got to be on both sides. Um, but no, it's
I
things
can
like
appreciate
that
that.
like, yeah, I know, me too. It's
Yeah.
things like that, like, it's not policeable. Like, and again, putting it on the plate of an educator of like, well, you guys help enforce this and have them put the phones away. Like, you can only do so much.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, for my own kids, I've set it up so as soon as it hits 8:30, it locks down, and they've got 2 people they can text or call, and that's the only thing they can do on their phones. Well, that and photos, so they can take pictures, and, as long as we've had the discussion on appropriate, picture taking and asking for permission and all that stuff, but it locks down, and then at 3:30, once the bell rings, it
yep.
opens back up again. And that's me as a parent doing that, and they understand that, and they get it because they know they're at school for a very particular reason, right? Um, but again, like, how do you get everyone on the same page? Like, if parents were all doing that and schools like had this particular it would be a lot easier, right? But that also, again, assumes that we're having discussions on the why. We're not just doing it. We're having some really thoughtful discussions as what I want you to get out of your time at school, why it's so important to be able to be present for your teachers, but for your friends, and like we hear friend groups all the time. It's so irritating because I'm trying to talk to them and they're always on their phone.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So
Yeah.
you remove them and there's that conversation of like, oh, it's so much better. We can actually talk. I think where we need to be careful is like when we start to say that, oh yes, if we remove them all our kids are going to talk. The reality is, for kids that have a friend group, they might talk more. For kids that still don't feel connected to other folks, their friend groups that they have, they exist in other states or other countries or other cities. And they feel connection in a way that they've never had in their own communities. And that's the double edge, right, of being online, right? There are some real opportunities and connections that these kids make from instruction and learning to friendship. And it's we want to be, at the same time, are incredibly wary of going too far, going too all in, or finding a connection with the wrong people or the wrong groups. I heard this quote, which I found it very interesting as we think about, especially this conversation around just devices in the lives of kids, but especially how we're thinking about right now, like cell phones in schools. And it's that we've all been feeling kind of this frustration, whether it be around kind of like the academic need or the distraction sense or social media or bullying, whatever the issues are. And cell phones and removing cell phones from the classroom has become kind of this vessel of a solution that we're all like, oh, this is it. But again, it all feels like a very easy vessel for us to all kind of attach to, but it may not necessarily be the vehicle to drive solutions. It could be one way to get started, but it's far more complicated, nuanced than just saying remove the device. But we're all looking for a vessel to blame, somewhere to put all of our frustrations. And then we've had literature like The Anxious Generation and a number of other books that have come up and really very specifically said it's because of these phones, right? And if we remove these things, it'll change the way our kids interact and live. And that's just not rooted yet in any real data that can be replicated in every single district, right? That's not the experience for every school. They'll find pockets of opportunities or pockets of really great, things that have come up from it. But my community here in California is going to be different from your community over in Woodbridge. So the impact is not necessarily going to be consistent.
Yeah.
We need to know our communities.
And perhaps even school to school within a district based on age or even leadership. It can be, may not even be within the same town that it would be the same thing.
Yeah.
Totally.
And yeah, absolutely. I mean, Merv, I can't thank you enough for wanting to join us and being a part of the conversation today. Not just personally because I enjoy you and I enjoy talking with you, but I know that your perspective comes from a place that's rooted in you're also on the other side of the fence with this, right? You're parenting two, a teenager and a soon-to-be teenager. God bless you.
Yeah. They're just teens.
God bless you. Yeah, and it's all things that we are sharing in shared experiences together, whether it's in two different parts of the country, but the experience is still the same. And I really appreciate your insight and your willingness to join us on our show today. So as always, Jamie and Merv, I appreciate you very much for joining us
Joseph
today.
and Merv, I appreciate you both. Merv, thank you so much for for all of the information that you shared with us today. We hope we can have you back again here on the Balancing Act podcast.
Yeah. So we'll see everybody next time on the Balancing Act podcast. See you guys next time. Bye.
Take care, y'all.
Look for the Balancing Act podcast every week on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Thank you for being a part of our audience. We appreciate you.